Music is so important to my partner and I that early in our decision to make feature films, we decided to include it at the very top of our filmmaking manifesto. We both agreed that music, whether diegetic, non-diegetic, intentional or otherwise, is the heart and driver of our film. I think for me this mostly relates to my childhood experience of music, namely that my parents were both musicians and I was chained to a piano from K to 12. Music in film is one of the first things I recognize on a visceral level, probably more so than cinematography or even narrative, which is ironic, since I now consider myself a screenwriter and by no means a musician. Otherwise, I've done enough editing over the years to know that music is an essential non-diegetic element in any audiovisual medium. From a purely technical standpoint, it smooths over a million rough spots between cuts. It's more often appropriate for a scene than would be sound effects. And yes, it can cue viewers to key emotional developments in the film. And while I'm not necessarily a fan of deploying music to evoke emotion in viewers, I think in subtle ways it can stir feelings or reveal elements of character that will just ever so gently enhance emotional responses. For example, it wasn't until I cranked the volume in this scene in Paul Thomas Anderson's Phantom Thread that I realized there was a score beneath it.
Pull this back for you.
But it's fair to say that music in the orchard personifies the character not just of our protagonist, but of the region itself, the Creston Valley. The orchard, which we will meet again in our third feature film, Hexa, is a bewitched place. It's this bedeviled place that metaphorically is a kind of drug for its victims. And the Creston Valley itself is similarly enchanted, as in this scene when Lucas realizes he's completely screwed. I should also say I'm a huge fan of silence in film, especially in horror film. I'm thinking in particular how silence in Fellini's TOBY, DAMMIT worked almost in counterpoint to the score by Nino Rota, and how utterly unnerving that dead soundtrack was when the she-devil appears on screen. Now, having said that, there's relatively little silence in the orchard, although I think this scene, where our protagonist sees the ghosts of his dead family, uses silence rather effectively. In the end, silence works as a kind of music here. As for tapping into local musicians, we have the good fortune to know this guy, Rick Brown, who here is making his appearance in the orchard. When we first met him, he was running a local music venue through which we were introduced to many regional and Canadian musicians, including Alana Cameron, The New Customs, Gary Dethridge, Jason Dethridge, Steve Pearson, and Selkirk Range, also known as Gordon Gow, who is a respected communications scholar and a colleague of ours. These musicians have been gracious and generous in allowing us to use their incredible music to, as I say, personify the character of the orchard. Now, we did reach out to local musicians with a general idea of co-branding. That is because we were initially able to offer only nominal fees and, hopefully, in time, residuals for the use of their music. We decided we would promote them as often as we could, this video being one example. I'm not sure this strategy has been of any particular advantage to them as yet, although that may change when the orchard is more fully distributed. In fact, co-branding is not a bad strategy for many first-time filmmakers if you can manage it. It introduces you to some very fine, less established musicians and their music. The alternative is to approach established musicians through their licensing agency for use of their music, which can immediately soak up a major part of your budget. I always think of Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused, and that a large percentage, over 10% I believe, of his budget was spent on the soundtrack. I believe it was worth it to him in the end, but it definitely took a chunk out of his hide. I had initially set my heart on using music from the Australian band Dope Lemon, and in fact, we licensed a few of their songs for our film festival and limited theatrical release of The Orchard. But in the end, we couldn't afford this work on a streaming paradigm. I also think music in The Orchard is primed to reflect the tragic trajectory of the film. It starts off with a hopeful song, Hey Little Bird by the New Customs, and as the picture progresses, the music becomes increasingly unhinged and stoned and monumental. Consider Ilana Cameron's In the Winter. Selkirk Range's The Longest Night of the Year. Steve Pearson's Halo in the Night.
Sitting by the window with another...
And Jason Deathridge's exemplary soundtrack throughout. All these individual scenes, or music videos, if you follow that metaphor, build to the tragic hero's bittersweet end, which turns things around again with the song in a major key, Selkirk Range's Broken Horse.
What we say when we talk to God. And this old soul.
So for me, one of the greatest uses of a musical theme in a soundtrack is in James Foley's 1986 At Close Range, which uses a Madonna song, Live to Tell, as its key musical driver. What was really genius about the use of music here was that this Madonna song was popular at the time of the film's release. It was a top 5 single on Billboard, eventually hitting the number 1 spot in May 1986. The film At Close Range was released in April of that year, so both the song and the film coincided. This is marketing cross-promotion at its best. The other brilliant thing about the Close Range soundtrack is how it teases out the musical theme of the song Live to Tell. Listen to how these few bars in the opening credits anticipate the full experience of Madonna's song at the end of the film.
He's my father.
The composer Patrick Leonard plays with the theme throughout the soundtrack, lightening it, transposing it from a minor into a major key during the romantic scenes of the film, using bits and pieces of the theme to illustrate the relationship of the father and son. Soundtrack-wise, I don't think you can do it better than this. By the way, you can view At Close Range on TOBY, which is also one of the platforms on which you can see The Orchard. We'll leave links in our description below. Thank you for watching, for liking and subscribing. More later, dear viewers.